we're good to go? Okay, thank you. We'll call this meeting to order. And disclosure of pecuniary interests, we have one from Mayor Fulci related to Public Works Accounts Check 24236 as it pertains to a family member. Also checked with our CAO, and I have a declaration of transparency that I'm told this is the appropriate time, and it's related to an item in general government. But since the Integrity Commissioner report last month, which found that I was a member of the Marwood Golf Course, I have for personal reasons formally deferred the start of my membership in the club for a year until May 2020. Because of this, I have obtained the advice of the Integrity Commissioner, who advised that on this basis, as I am currently not a member of the golf club, I have no conflict of interest and can participate in discussion related to the golf course. With council's approval, Mr. Don Smith has not yet arrived, so we would carry on with the fire department report, and hopefully Mr. Smith will arrive shortly. So, Deputy Chief.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning, Greg.
Just on behalf of Chief McWilliam, who's away today, I'll deliver the update. So late last week, we increased the fire danger rating to high, and it'll remain at that level until we get any sort of appreciable amount of rain. The forecast is looking like Saturday we might finally see some relief, so we'll hope for that. It was a busy 4 weeks in terms of operational response. We had a total of 8 fires, 4 of them involving structures. Of the 8 fires, 3 of them involved careless disposal of smoking material, and another 2 of them were careless disposal of cooking ashes from people cooking on the beaches. So after the last fire, we did connect with the media and do a little bit of information sharing on that, and hopefully trying to prevent some of those fires from happening. We also, as you are aware, had 2 fatalities on the beachfront on July 1st and on July 6th. I'm happy to say that a good collaboration between emergency services, but I also wanted to give kudos to both the bylaw department and as well M&R staff in both of those situations. They had staff members on site that were able to assist us, and several members of the public also stepped up and helped us out. And the final update is just a community outreach program that we're just about completed delivering now. It was a partnership that we developed with the bylaw department. We picked 5 of the affordable housing locations within Wasaga Beach, which are Granada, the 7th Lane County Building, Waterfront Apartments, Diconia, and Bay Breezes. And what we've done is sent out an invitation to each one of those residents, which most are adults, but there certainly is some kids in some of these locations. We bring them coffee and Timbits, invite them out to the parking lot. We talk to them about the top reasons why we see fires in Wasaga Beach, provide them with some smoke alarm, carbon monoxide alarm education, and then finally we do some live fire extinguisher training with them. So we found that thus far it has been successful. It's sort of a more informal way to connect with some of our community members that don't typically come out to our public education events. So we're going to complete these ones this year and then assess the program and see maybe how we can improve it for next year. So with that being said, that's my report, and if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Foster.
Thank you. I just, for your very first comment, raising the fire, whatever, warning level to, what was it?
High.
High.
Yeah.
What does that do for the sake of open burning or fire, backyard fire pits, things like that? What should the public know?
Right. So the fire danger rating system is an education tool. So you will see the graph used on our website and on the roadsides, and it's really just an awareness tool to let people know that the probability of fire starting and spreading is higher right now. There is no fire ban in place at this time. So if we continue to get dry weather, and if the fire chief determines that it has produced a substantial risk to the community, then a fire ban will be put in place. But for as of right now, people can continue to have their bonfires in their yards, provided that they follow the rules outlined in the bylaw.
Having a source of water beside it, all that kind of
Also limiting the size and making sure that the fire is completely extinguished when they're done with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further comments, questions? Yes, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. The one fatality in the water, was it ever determined if it was medical heart attack that caused that? I don't think I ever saw a final determination of that.
So this is the event that happened on July the 6th, and our understanding from information that we got on the scene from witnesses was that the individual may have been suffering from some sort of medical distress prior to going under the water. He was transported to the hospital but did succumb to his injuries. My understanding is that they will be doing an autopsy to determine the cause of death, but I haven't received any sort of update as to what that might be.
And subsequent, with the fire rating as high, how is fireworks handled? I'm still hearing in my neighborhood and have fireworks going off all the time from people. There's no event going on, they're just setting them off, and that is a fire hazard also.
Absolutely, and that should be something that people are aware of. We have our bylaw in place in the town, and aside from having a special permit for it, there's only certain days that you can use fireworks in Wasaga Beach, so we would remind people to make themselves familiar with the rules and ensure that they're being followed. And if there is community members that are concerned because they're seeing them going on, contact the bylaw department because they will respond and make sure that they're put out. We haven't had any incidents as of yet, but as the conditions continue to dry up, it increases the probability for sure.
Okay. Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you.
So moved by Councillor Wells and seconded by Councillor Kenny. Resolved that the community service section according to committee received, that's the presentation that didn't go. I'll have to move to the next one. Moved by Councillor Kenny and seconded by Councillor Watson. Resolved that the community service section according to committee received the July 2019 Fire Department report for information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Foster.
In favor.
Councillor Kenny.
In favor.
Councillor Watson.
In favor?
Councillor Wells.
Favor.
Chair Blanchet.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Okay, as we'll now move to the consent agenda, and I have no items pulled in community service section. Is that correct for everyone? So maybe before we read this motion, do we need to request that if Mr. Smith shows up after, that we would try to fit the presentation in? Or?
I think, Mr. Chair, I think that would just continue along as we proceed through the morning's business.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Chair, sorry. I know we don't need to poll just to make a comment, but I just want to make a comment on item 3.5.4, the Snow Angels program. I think this is a really good initiative, and we had someone who was in discussing snow removal between the public, staff, and the administration here. We've come up with an attempt at a solution. So I just wanted to point it out. People should have a look at that Snow Angels program as it's written in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment? Okay. Resolved that, I'll make sure I get the right one now. So moved by Councillor Watson and seconded by Councillor Wells. Resolved that the community service section of Coordinating Committee hereby receives the July 18th, 2019 consent agenda items 3.4 through to 3.7, and that all recommendations contained therein be adopted, excluding agenda items pulled, which there were none.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Foster.
In favor.
Councillor Kenny.
In favor.
Councillor Watson.
In favor?
Councillor Wells.
In favor.
Chair Blanchet.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed. Thank you.
So guess we'll, what is it, 10-minute recess enough to change? Okay, so we'll recess till 5:02.
Can't walk it, George?
Get walking. Get jogging around.
You got 10 minutes.
Parking lot.
My steps are still.
Just keep circling the table.
Gets a little bit Yeah, exactly. I don't wanna stop streaming because that'll stop the meeting.
Oh, I see.
Oh, hey, Laura did. Laura went to talk to him.
Oh, okay, sorry,
Oh,
okay.
that's good. But I don't know if he, no, I hit stop recording. Is it still live on your computer? It's still live. Hang on. This is like, yeah, it's still live. Still live. What's Derek's name? Yeah, he said, I don't know what else to tell you, I need to put it on there for a reason. I don't know what else to tell you. That's nice. He said bring the keyboard over and but what is that gonna do, or is because it's not stopping, even if I bring the keyboard over?
What if you just hit stop?
If I hit stop streaming,
Reinitiated it later.
it won't do that.
Oh, okay.
It'll stop, meaning it'll break the feed, and we won't be able to restart it.
No, not, that's built in on these things.
Well, it doesn't help that our IT just said, I don't know what to tell you.
Said what?
I don't know what to tell you. There's that's there for a reason. That makes no help us right now. Because this is not, it's not starting at all. Like it's, I shut it off and turn it on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll call the meeting back to order, the Public Works section. I will remind anyone, if you feel you have a conflict of interest at any time, let us know. I know that Mayor Byfolchi, the item that you highlighted is at the end of, is in the check register for this section. That being said, right now we have no deputations, petitions, presentations, and public meetings. As Councillor Belanger mentioned in the previous one, if the gentleman from the previous meeting shows up, we'll allow him to speak in this section if that's all right. There's no other agency reports, right? Oh, sorry, unfinished business. We have the all-terrain multi-purpose off-highway utility and recreational off-highway vehicle bylaw, which I think we talked about last time is under construction. It'll be coming to a table near us very soon. There are no other agency reports. On the consent agenda, there was one item pulled, the River Resource Committee meeting, item number 4.5.9 has been pulled, and as I mentioned, the mayor has declared a conflict on one of the items on the check register. So I will read the resolution then. It's moved by.
So I was just gonna say, the accounts have been pulled for a separate motion as
Yes.
well, correct? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. For the consent agenda piece, it's moved by Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor Belanger. Resolve the Public Works section of the Coordinated Committee hereby receives the July 18th, 2019 consent agenda items 4.4.1 through 4.7.6, and that all the recommendations contained therein be adopted, excluding agenda items pulled for the motion and voted on separately.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Kinney.
In favor.
Councillor Watson.
In favor.
Councillor Wells.
In favor.
Chair Foster.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So that takes us down to, I guess, the River Resource Committee item. And that was Councillor Watson. You had asked that that be pulled, the River Resource Committee.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably direct the question to our council representative, Councillor Wells on that. But just, I believe an email circulated in the last couple of days just about some issues of wake and affecting one of our river businesses, I guess, and capsizing some vessels. So I think there was a request to look into doing something with the wake zone. I've also been approached by a few property owners with the high water that the wake is going over their walls and eroding it from the back, doing some damage. So I guess the request there was trying to look somehow of reducing wake on the river at this point. So I just thought I'd bring that to the attention of the committee. I know we've dealt over different terms of council that some of us have been on. There's been requests to reduce speed limits and that, but at this point I'm just putting it out for the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a
Thank you, and I'll certainly take the concern back to the next River Resources Committee. I think it also may be something that we need to take to as well to community policing, because the speed limit on the river is actually set by Ministry of Transport. It's deemed a non-navigable waterway, set by Ministry of Transport and enforced by Ontario Provincial Police. So there's a need to discuss with OPP how they can perhaps increase. I know resources are tight, but perhaps under the current conditions we can convince the inspector that there's some need for increased enforcement, particularly around the Schoonertown Bridge area. There has been some discussion around the rental Sea-Doo business and perhaps some further look at controls there. Unfortunately, there's not much you can do with the privately owned Sea-Doos that are coming in and out. Of course, the high water's made a big difference to the whole circumstance, there's no doubt about that. The whole issue of speed on the river during my time has been probably reviewed at least 3 times, maybe more, but I know at least 3 times. and it's always been, you know, overwhelmingly leave it alone and, you know, try to do the education and enforcement. Some of the larger boats that travel the river, in fact, to reduce them down to 10 or K, which means they're probably gonna do 15 or so, is actually gonna create more wave action than if they're up on plane. So it's not an easy solution, but I certainly appreciate, I was just actually visiting with one resident yesterday around the same issue on River Road West. And I've talked to a couple of people that live on the river about it, and have committed to them that I will follow through with the two committees and as well talk to OPP to try to see what we can do in terms of increased enforcement. And with respect to our paddleboard kayaking business, see where we can go with the area above the Schoonertown Bridge. That was pretty much a non-navigable area until this year. So it's simply changed the tenure.
Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Kenny, you had a...
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up the comments by Councillor Wells. I believe anything regarding a business would be going through our bylaw, just to keep tight looking at that. I encourage individuals to call our OPP if they see something wrong on the river, because again, sorry my voice, but again, more people calling, the more reactions we'll get. And I also advise individuals that, true, privately run vehicles on the water are harder to look at. However, if you can capture what the individual is doing and a hull number, it gives our people over at the OPP some material to follow up with.
Thank you. Councillor Wells, you had something more?
Well, actually, just Councillor Kenny's just almost covered it. One of the things I did say to the resident yesterday was, you know, with cell phones today, photographs and videos, get a hull number and take a photographs or video of the behavior so that they have something to go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, and in a way, it reflects our roads in that there's a lot of power vehicles that seem to forget that there are vehicles that are less able to get out of the way of wakes, etc. So anyway, thank you for that, George. That covers your, okay.
Thank you.
So that being said, the Rivers Resorts Committee meeting minutes of May 16th is moved by Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Resolved that Public Works section of the Coordinated Committee does hereby receive the River Resorts Committee report for May 16th, 2019 for information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Kinney?
In favor?
Councillor Watson? In favor. Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Chair Foster?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. Departmental accounts, and this is where the worship is declared. So it's moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded, that's the deputation. Sorry, moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Boulanger, resolved that the June 1st to 30th, 2019 accounts as reviewed by Public Works section of the Coordinating Committee are hereby confirmed. Anybody got anything? Nope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Kinney?
In favor?
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Chair Foster?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
All right. I think that's pretty well everything. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I just wonder if I could ask Director of Public Works, just as a comment only, if he could give an update, which will go out live stream on where we're at with the River Road West and when we anticipate the paving to occur.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. It was anticipated this week. However, just given the wet season, seasonal start in May and June, the contractor and the delays they have experienced, They've indicated that next week is when they'll be mobilizing, and service will be obviously prepared. There's the asphalt ramping that needs to come out, and they were able to put base course down in one day, and so I don't see why they wouldn't be able to accomplish that within a couple of days next week. Obviously weather dependent. If it rains, they cannot place surface asphalt, but Primrose have been waiting for their subcontractor. We knew it was going to be mid-July back in Christmas time, but actually, coincidentally, I spoke with a contractor just yesterday who's been waiting for surface asphalt since last fall, same company. So we're not alone. However, we appreciate everyone's patience and certainly that of council as well. But next week is when they've currently committed to paving surface course.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else? I just thought with the director here, he almost got away without having to make a comment on anything today. So if there's nothing else, we will adjourn this section till 9:15.
Coordinated Committee. We have a public meeting that will take place at 11 o'clock, so we will move forward with the agenda. If there's no questions with unfinished business, we will move to other agency reports, of which there are none. We have a consent agenda, and the following items have been pulled. 5.57, site plan matters. 5.5.10, economic development matters, approval for alcohol sales at the Wasaga Beach Farmers Market. 5.511, integrated watershed management plan for the Wasaga Valley Conservation Authority. 5.512, planning for Wasaga Beach Provincial Parks. And 5.7.3, building department report dated July 3rd, 2019. Yeah, and that's it unless there's anything else at the table. Okay. So then, we'll move ahead with the consent agenda. So all items listed below will be approved by one resolution. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member requests it, in which case the item has to be pulled. So this is moved by Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor Keelan. Resolved that the Development Services section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the July 18th, 2019 consent agenda, items 5.1 through to 5.7, and that all the recommendations contained therein be adopted, excluding the agenda items that have been pulled from the motion. They will be voted on separately.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Chair Bray?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. So the first item to be pulled was item 5.5.7, application for site plan amendment, DAS Development Corporation, and this was pulled by Councilor Boulanger.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. I had a few concerns related to this. There's quite a few amendments, one major amendment being suggested. But there's also changing in the verbiage, and they want to, the recommendation is to state that building permits may be withheld until these prerequisites are met. The original did not allow for building permits until prerequisites were met. My understanding is, and I'm not an expert on this, I'd ask for clarification, but I believe our current bylaws recommend or state that prerequisites have to be met prior to building permits being allowed. And this appears to be preferential treatment for a specific development where other things that are going on, we certainly would not be willing to change the verbiage to may withheld, be able to withhold permits. I believe that the permits should comply with our bylaw and that all prerequisites should be met prior to that. The other thing is, I did make a formal request to the mayor that we do have a formal public meeting related to the site plan and the casino because I believe that the local residents, after the specific site selection, have never had an opportunity to input into the project. I've been told that all proper process is being followed. I know of at least a couple of residents that are pursuing whether that's accurate or not. But again, at this point, I believe there's no plan for a formal meeting. I still believe it's highly recommended that there's enough residents that have expressed concern to me that it would be the transparent thing to do.
Mr. Reeve, did you want to make any comments on the questions or statements for Mr. Heron? Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Committee. With regard to the the report and the recommendation for changes to the site plan control agreement, the real, why we're here is because of the limitations in the site plan control bylaw, which provides delegation of authority to staff. But that delegation of authority is limited to conditions that staff could apply to a site plan control agreement. And through the review of this application, there are one condition in particular, and then the lift H condition as well that was mentioned by Councillor Belanger, which we felt that we really need to come to committee to ask for permission to apply those conditions to this application. The condition of the lift H, staff have on our work agenda for this year, and probably leading into next year, to update the site plan control bylaw, which dates back to 2010, and also to update the subdivision agreement template. And the rationale for that is streamlining the development process so that the town remains competitive. What we're finding is that the condition of not allowing an applicant to even apply for a building permit until lift H is not following best practices for other municipalities, so we're losing competitiveness there. And also that the real issue is that a building permit could not actually be issued until lift H occurred. So what staff are looking at is a request that the town adjust its policy, its process in terms of the application of when a building permit could be applied for. Nonetheless, it does not change that a building permit could not be issued until lift hold occurs.
Thank you. Further to?
Sorry?
Is it in addition to?
It's a clarification.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. But I understand, and I am all for the streamlining and everything else, but in this particular case, we have many developments that are going on, but this request is specific to this development. We're not suggesting that we make this change for all developments that are occurring in our community now. So other developments would still would be held to the current bylaw until such time as it's updated.
Based on the resolution that's before committee today, that is about 50% accurate, I would say, because I don't think staff looked at whether we would carry this forward to other applications. Staff were more looking at this, that yes, this is a one-off request, it is a specific request from the developer, but that this is something that staff were looking at anyway, and we're going to bring forward through an update to the site plan control bylaw at some point. So there is some truth to the comment by Councillor Belanger, but we would expect that going forward it would be applied equitably to all development.
Thank you. Mr. Did you want to add anything to that?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the review and iteration process of the recent site plan agreement with Elm for phase 1 of its development, a similar modification had been implemented such that they could apply for permits even before the holding provision was removed. And it's to allow for that detailed review of the architectural plans with the knowledge that the holding would be a prerequisite to the issuance of the permits.
Thank you. Mayor Byford.
Thank you. Just in response to Councillor Belanger's comments with regard to his request, which I received last night, to hold a mayor's forum in the coming weeks that in order to answer questions and things on the casino and the site plan. I've explained, and I think it's been explained well several times now, that the process was followed. It started in 2012. The rules were followed, public engagement occurred. There was 5 sites that were approved for this casino to be located, and we were always aware, as recent as last year, under a media release that went out under Mayor Smith's name, that there were 5 sites and that it was acceptable for any of those sites to be chosen. So to now request of me last night to hold a meeting because the preferred site didn't receive any more input, would be going against our proper practice. It would be setting a precedent that moving forward, any future site plans, maybe we'll dive into building permits. I mean, we would, at what point do we open it up so that the public has input on everything? They go through a proper process. By holding that forum and allowing input into something, or even giving the public the mindset that they could change something at this point, would not be accurate. It's, you know, we hear input all the time. I'm hearing great things in the community. I realize that there is a group in town who is not happy with the chosen location, but that is the chosen location, and we followed a proper process to get to that point. I'm not prepared to change it, to muddy the waters, and that's all that it would do at this point. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think really staff have answered this, but I just want to be very clear on it. So this is specifically the paragraph 3 that's I've highlighted here that talks about the H symbol, and it says stating that building permits may be withheld until those prerequisites are satisfied is what the new wording will say. Alan has told us that it has been, a similar item has been done for Elm. This is being done for this property, and should it develop between now and the time that they redo the bylaw, that any developer could request a similar, and they will be considered on the even ground as everyone else. So there's no, this precedent isn't set here. It was set previously, and it's been redone here. And should a developer for something come forward, they would receive exactly the same consideration. Is that correct? Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, that is correct, and the denominator to the discussion is that a building permit could not be issued until the lift hold is actually adopted and enforced.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to thank planning staff for being proactive on this whole amendment maybe to the site plan agreement. I think that's what you're talking about a little bit earlier, to be competitive. I think the word was used going forward. All municipalities are under a lot of pressure from the provincial government. They'll want to wait to speed things up, be more efficient, deal with things quicker, and I think this is a great example of doing that and getting sort of ahead of the curve, so thank you.
Seeing no more questions or comments. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Wells. Resolved that Development Services Section Coordinated Committee received the report of the Senior Planner on application for Site Plan Amendment SP0319 dated July 18th, 2019, and the Development Services Section of Coordinated Committee approve and authorize the alterations reflected in the first amending Site Plan Agreement appended to the report of the Senior Planner on application for Site Plan Amendment SP0319 dated July 18th, 19 as attachment number 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
Opposed?
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
I'm in favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor?
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Chair Bray?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 1 opposed.
Thank you. The next item to be pulled was 5.510, approval for alcohol sales at Woosok Beach Farmers Market. And this was pulled through me, through it with a discussion with Mr. Herring yesterday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The proposal is something that came fairly quickly to staff in short notice, and staff worked diligently to get a report on and get it before committee. In doing an analysis, staff are recommending a friendly amendment to the resolution that's before committee right now. And the amendment simply looks at that we do support, in principle, the idea of the change to the farmers market, but there are some conditions that have to be met most of the conditions would be met by the proponent, and one in particular is getting a permit from the Alcohol and Gaming Commission. We've noticed that the location where the area is proposed for alcohol consumption is on actual M&R lands, not municipal lands. So that was another rationale for changing the resolution to say that the proponent should secure permits or permission from that other landowner. And finally, there may be some unknowns, so we've added a clause saying that and staff be directed to report back to committee if necessary, if there are further permissions required from committee. That may entail a change to the agreement that the town currently has with the farmers market, simply because with the sale of alcohol, it's a significant change to the form and function of that market.
If I could read the proposed friendly amendment and then see if we get support, is that appropriate?
Yes, Chair Gray, the motion hasn't been read, so it's really not a friendly amendment, it's whatever.
Okay,
you're
so I can
putting
read the revised motion and see if there is
The motion is
support.
on the floor.
Okay. In particular, Councillor Boulanger and Councillor Kinney, you had moved and seconded it, so I'm not sure if you realized it was slightly second than the one that was in your agenda package.
No.
So please listen carefully. So moved by Councillor Boulanger, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Resolved that coordinated committee recommend to council that the Wasaga Beach Farmers Market receive support in principle to accept a vendor to sell alcohol at the market, subject to all legal requirements being met, subject to securing permission from the landowner, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and that staff report back on this item as necessary.
I'll stand
Okay with
on
letting
that.
your name
Yeah.
stand?
I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. So the motion has been read. Councillor Foster, did I see a hand? Or was it, sorry, Councillor Watson?
Just a couple of things. I'm very happy with this farmer's market, and by visiting the market, talking to the vendors, they're very happy with this new location also. I think it's a real asset, and I think this is another building block going forward. My concern is, we know how slowly things can move with M&R. Is there any alternative on town lands that this could be accommodated in the event that M&R takes 18 months to come back with an answer on this? I just don't know how fast they can move on it. It'd be nice if they could give an answer quickly, but I don't know if that would happen, so I'm just looking for an alternative.
One of the rationales for putting the last clause in and that staff report back as necessary is because that could in fact happen. If there is a time delay in getting permissions from the ONRF, the farmers market might want to come back to staff and say, well, can we do it on town lands? So there's a fluidity to the discussion that while supporting it in principle, we also want to continue to be able to work with them, and if there's a need to report back, then we will.
Thank you. Councillor Boulanger?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm all for this too. My only question would be is that this could also be an enhancement for jazz in the park and everything else. Is there any additional or anything else has to be done if another event that's happening in the same proximity wants to utilize that offering?
We haven't come across that. It would be something we would certainly consider. In terms of events, it would be a cross-pollination of several departments, including events and economic development and whatever other department might be involved to apply those considerations. But in the absence of seeing another event coming forward, it's difficult to answer.
Yeah, and just to comment to that, we looked at the schedule and the next two events are at the gazebo, and then the 6 after that are back at the band shell. So there might be overlap if it happens quickly, and if not, then it might not.
Yeah, just in continuation is that I think most people realize, but I have visited the Stainer market, and they do something very similar. They've been doing it for quite a while. They find it very successful, and they do cross-pollinate with other events that are occurring in that area. So.
Councillor Foster?
Yes,
Chair. I agree with this. I hesitantly agree with this, and certainly in principle it's fine. And I understand, I see the value, because I've also been out to Stainer and done all that. I believe, to Councillor Watson's point, the current provincial government seems to be quite friendly towards loosening the liquor control rules. And I do have some concerns about you know, the spin-off to other businesses around that are licensed, you know, establishments. But I do concede there's value to this, and I will support it. I just, perhaps I'm not quite ready for the brave new world that we have coming forward. But I do think, you know, as long as it follows all the guidelines and staff are come back to us with, you know, the full proposal, I do think that the ministry may get approval quicker than you might think, given who's in Queen's Park right now.
Thank you, Councillor Wells.
Well, I think my comment actually has been already made, but I'll just reiterate it. It was, I don't have a concern with it, other than when I looked at the site plan, the impact on the Jazz in the Park event on the nights when it's being held in the gazebo. Now, that's not from the point of view of the alcohol sale, but rather from the point of view of the space that's being allocated for the purpose. And I guess I'm looking for, and you can't give it to me now, but in terms of moving forward, that we have some assurances that the space requirements are not going to impact in any way the Jazz in the Park event that has been in place for a number of years. So I think it's a matter of through staff working between the Jazz in the Park event with our event staff, the farmers market people, to ensure that they can come to a compatible compromise to make them both work.
Councillor Keating, I think you have the last comment.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I may not, but I do like the concept, and as far as other businesses in the area, I do believe when the licensing is approached and looked at, we look at that to see the impact on the whole area and that. So, but again, I think it's a good move forward, as other councillors have said.
Thank you. The motion has been read. I will pass it to our CEO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Seconded by Fulci?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor?
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Chair Bray?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed. Thank you.
All right, next item, Integrated Watershed Management Plan for Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Area. This is 5.5.11, and it was pulled by Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wanted to make a quick comment. In the summary page, it's noted that the town provided comments on the draft NBCA Watershed Management Plan, and the NBCA made changes to the document in response to the town's comments and has now approved the document. So I'd just like to thank our planning staff for making the comments, and also the Chris Hibbert, the Director of Watershed Management, and his staff for bringing this forward. We've heard it, certainly as chair of the NBCA, we've heard the plan brought to us at the NBCA meetings. It's a very comprehensive plan. It's an update of one that was done a few years ago, and is congratulate them on the work that's forward on both venues. Thank you.
Okay, no more comments or questions? Moved by Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor Boulanger. Resolved that the Coordinating Committee recommends to Council that the report on the final NBCA Integrated Watershed Management Plan be accepted for information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor.
Seconded by Fulci?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor?
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells.
In favor.
Chair Bray.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Okay, 5.512, planning for Wasaga Beach Provincial Park, the Ontario Parks consultation. This was pulled by multiple members of council, so who would like to go first? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I pulled this for 2 reasons. One is having, this is really an important document for the town, and I'm not sure people are aware of it, but having tried to search it through Google and the MNR, and it's the document, the pieces are somewhat hard to find, but I will encourage absolutely everyone to go to the very first page of it, where they have a found here hyperlink, which takes you immediately to the area. I think, and when we had the special presentation from the park superintendent and the consultant from the MNRF, or whatever version of letters they use today, what I commented then, and I'll reiterate it now, oftentimes when they're looking at park planning, they're talking about a park surrounded by rocks and trees and water. We have a park that's surrounded by an urban center, a long strip of park that's got, and a lot of it was achieved through expropriation back in the early 70s. So I think for everyone in this town, whether it's an individual or a business, this is a hugely important piece to read carefully and comment on. And the town made comments, and I don't necessarily agree with them, that's my call. But I respect, the choice and the work that was done on it. But I would really encourage people to have a very serious look through the whole thing. There's things like overnight accommodation, and I have challenges with the idea of with having a variety of cottage courts, hotels, etc. in town, that all of a sudden we get the prime waterfront property becomes open to transient campers. There is a value to that. There's spin-off business. I get that. Everyone has to make their own decision. But I do believe everybody in our town should be actively commenting on this, and they only have till July 25th, and that's why that found here button is probably the best thing we posted on the agenda today. Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I absolutely agree with Councillor Foster that this is a very important document. Everyone should read it. It touches on an awful lot of areas and items that are important to this town, and I would really like to thank staff again for raising a lot of these issues, especially with the collaborative part with, I'll just call them MNR for now. I know there's different acronym now, but the collaboration and the tourism part of that has been sorely lacking with MNR to partner with us. I talk to the first mayor of Wasaga Beach all the time, and he's always adamant that they are supposed to be our partners, and they've not really lived up to that over the years to cross-pollinate, the term she used earlier, on marketing of the beach and tourism, and helping us be a partner as it was deemed Wasaga Beach was supposed to be the playground of Ontario. And I just commend staff again for raising those issues. I don't know where they're going to go, but at least they're there, and thank you.
Councillor Boulanger.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to suggest that it would be beneficial if staff or council considered adding a couple of specific things related to the comments. And one is related to the maintenance of nesting plover areas. There's a lot of jurisdictions across the world that look at these things differently. Experts now say that the plovers actually like an area of pristine beach, but the overgrowth is becoming detrimental to tourism and to even the valuation of beachfront properties. There is a number of jurisdictions that certainly they don't disturb anything during the actual nesting period, but after the nesting period ends, they clear an area of beach, and then over the coming year, they let it grow back naturally. And if you, especially with the high level waters now, I've been contacted by a lot of new residents recently, not new to the beach, but new to the concern with the higher level. It's even becoming more pronounced of a problem where there's areas of beach where there's literally no sand areas to even put down a chair anywhere near your property. So I just think that should be a consideration. I'm certainly all for the environment and all for protecting endangered species, but I believe there's a balance that would be struck that could find some middle ground. The second item, which again has been an ongoing issue for many residents, is the dredging of the mouth of the river and what occurred there and the materials that were deposited on New Wasaga Beach. Right now with the high water level, the tarp is exposed in under the water. I don't necessarily believe it poses a danger, but it's certainly unsightly. A lot of boulders that were not inherent to the composition of the beach are now rolling into the water and subsequently flowing down bay, and where there was a pristine sandy beach, we now have a lot of rocks and boulders. There's certainly individuals, matter of fact, one resident that's in the construction business would suggest that he clean it up at his own expense if he had to. But the point is, this was not a natural event on the beach. It was somehow approved. They realized that it's an issue, but the issue has never been resolved. And I think it should at least have comment in the document. Thank you.
Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Most of my comments around the importance of the public looking into this have already been made, so I won't reiterate that, except to say that the park was formed in the very early 70s. This is the first opportunity since for the local residents. In those days, it was like a population of some 2,500 people. We now have some 21,000 or so. So this is the first opportunity in over 40 years for the community to have an input into this provincial park within our town. I don't want to say that it'll be another 40 years before you get a second opportunity, but if you recognize that you might only in your lifetime get one opportunity to comment, I would urge everyone to be familiar with it, every resident to be familiar with it, and to make whatever comments they think are appropriate. You'll never get a second chance in your lifetime.
Good comment to end then, thank you. Moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Wells. Resolved that coordinated committee recommend that council authorize staff to submit a comment letter to Ontario Parks on the Environmental Registry of Ontario for the parks planning document before July 25th, 2019, in the substantial form of those found in this report and including additional comments provided by council.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger?
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kenny?
In favor?
Councillor Watson?
In favor?
Councillor Wells?
In favor?
Chair Bray?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Okay, and the last item to be pulled was the 5.7.3, the building department report dated July 3rd, 2019. I believe this was Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick comment. I'm very pleased to see that our permit fees are actually almost exactly triple over last year at this time. Things seem to be humming along quite well, and I'm sure the departments are busy, so that's very good news to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Good news is a great way to end. Moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Wells, resolved that Development Services Section of Coordinated Committee received the Building Department report dated July 3rd, 2019 for information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger?
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor?
Councillor Kinney?
In favor?
Councillor Watson?
In favor?
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Chair Bray?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries and a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. So this section of Coordinated Committee will adjourn until 10 o'clock, where we will reconvene with General Government. And then I guess it'll into that for the public meeting for something. Thank you. For zoning bylaw. 10 o'clock we will reconvene.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call the General Government section of Coordinated Committee to order, and we'll start to proceed through our agenda. We have no deputations, presentations, petitions, or public meetings, although we are still unsure of Mr. Smith's presence, and should he arrive from the early meeting, we will break to allow him to do his presentation. Unfinished business, there is only one item, it's the signed bylaw review. Has anyone any questions with respect to that? Seeing none. Other agency reports, we have none. And the consent agenda, I have 3 items, I believe, that have been pulled from the consent agenda. They are 6.5.5, the Clerks Department, Director of Legislative Services and Clerks. Read the procedural bylaw amendments. 6.5.6, Administration Department, read the medical clinic update. And 6.5.7, the CAO's report with respect to the Marlwood Masters Lane Subdivision Agreement Instrument. Those are the 3 items that I currently have pulled. And I do have no conflict of interest that I'm aware of, but should you find you have one as you go through, then you can let me know. So we'll go first to the, sorry, David?
Just, you're gonna go to the consent agenda piece? I'd just like to comment, if I could, not pulling an item.
Fine.
The item is 6.58, the agreement with the OLG on for the lottery. I believe, and I'd like staff perhaps to indicate, I believe that's the same agreement that was the same percentages that were done back in 2012. I believe, I just want to make sure my recollection was accurate.
Mr. Chair, yes, the
Okay.
same percent.
Thank you, that's all I need.
Thank you. So we'll proceed then to the consent agenda as amended. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Bray and seconded by Councillor Kinney. Resolved that General Government Section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the July 18th, 2019 consent agenda items 6.4 through 6.7.2, and that all recommendations contained therein be adopted, excluding the agenda items pulled from the motion and voted on separately.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor?
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Chair Wells?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
So our first item pulled was item 6.5.5, which is in respect to procedural bylaw amendments. That was pulled by Councillor Boulanger.
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that I'm amazed I'm the only one that pulled this, but I have 2 major concerns with the recommendations as well as the timing of the recommendations. I think everyone here will remember that through the last term of council, there were a great many meetings that were somewhat uncomfortable with allowing the public to ask their questions and make their comments and voice their opinions. In fact, I believe one of the periods was added during that council, and this does increase transparency, and although sometimes it's uncomfortable to hear what our residents like and don't like, I think it's important. So first of all, giving the clerk the empowerment to refer a delegation to appropriate staff versus a public meeting, it really gives us the right to say, gee, if there's anything that we don't want discussed in public, that we maybe don't feel that would be comfortable, that let's usher that off to a staff member with consultation in private. I would have no problem if it's with the provision that the presenter or the one doing the deputation or presenting a petition is okay with meeting with staff versus a public meeting. I would support that 100%. Because certainly I will tell you right now, even as we speak, there has been a couple of residents that have requested presentations that will be coming up in the future, and this would now, of course, give us the opportunity to say, no, it would be best served to be dealt with staff. The second is the recommended changes to eliminating question period. This is the one opportunity where the head of council replies to our residents. In comment period, there's no reply required. Again, as the residents I speak to, they want that opportunity to see our head of council hear a question and respond to that question. I don't think it's appropriate that we have a process that says we need to have prerequisite, that we need time to prepare to answer every question. Like, we live every meeting, we read every document. On many things, we should be very knowledgeable and be able to talk off the top of our head, and I think that's appropriate. And I think that the elimination of this would be a great reduction in transparency.
Councillor Kinney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My concern again rests with the question period aspect. I looked over that issue several times, and although I understand the thought process that went into it as far as modifying it, I'm still at an end gate on being comfortable with that happening, Mr. Chair. I see around the table that we try to be as open to the public as possible. And yes, there's times that I've sat at council and saw individuals come up and misdirected questions happened and stuff like that. But I think I come back with my previous life where we are looking at all possible ways of connecting with the people, and I'm not comfortable with that aspect being removed because of that. That's my thoughts, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I on the two items that were raised by Councillor Belanger, I agree to an extent on that, because I find we've all at different times had delegations in front of us who come with a comment. And this morning I even cited the woman who was talking about snow removal. And I go, it gives the individual a chance to delegate, to say, this is what I think. And we had one on snow just this last month too. And so, because the reality is when a deputation comes, it's heard by all of council and it's referred to staff. Like, it doesn't go, they all go to staff, because we don't make decisions on plow routes or cutting schedules for grass. So I think there is a value to that for, the referral and deputation piece, because it is sometimes useful. Well, it's always useful for all of council to hear it, but it gives council and committee a chance to hear it. It provides a level of comfort to the individual that they're done, and it then gets delegated to the appropriate department. And that's usually the closing by any chair will sit there and say, thank you for that, we'll pass it on and we'll keep you in the loop. So I do like the delegation piece there. For the second part, the comment / question period, you can call it either way. I had a similar thought where I'm okay with the idea of name, address, the item to be specific so that it's literally, this is what I'm talking about. But I don't think the general nature of their comment is necessary to have ahead of time. They could say, I'm speaking in favor, speaking opposed, like more information, something. But I mean, we don't really, the idea with someone asking a question or making a comment is not that it's screened, it's that it's relevant to the items on the list. And we have seen through many terms of council, we've seen an item come up where someone's gone on a tangent and taken the farthest thread to try and link it. So I would support the question comment period being, the name and address. And I also have a concern that I understand for reporting, but people having to blare out on from a privacy point of view, blare out their name and address. I have some personal concerns with that one. So I figure if we have it written down, name, address, and you go, you know, we need it 15 minutes ahead of time, just gives the clerk time to do that. I think it shows respect for time of both the deputy and for the council. So that's my comment on that one. And then the last one said something about, I can't find it right at the moment. There was something about if it's not on the agenda or inappropriate, the member of the public would not be called up. And my question on that one automatically goes to who makes the call, right? Is it a staff? Is it a elected official that's making that call? And I have concerns with that. I think we have a time limit. And it does say something about, you know, 15 minutes, and if there's more, the mayor or the chair or whoever can control the, you know, you're not gonna get 5 minutes each because there's 15 people, it'll be narrowed down. I think that's fine in the controlling piece. And the last piece, and I'm just trying to find it here, has to do with the council meeting time flexibility. Sorry, it was the first item. And I understand that we have delegations and then some business of council carries on. And then if necessary, we have a closed session, and then we come out of the closed session to deal with that. But the flexibility of the time piece, from the way I read it, is we'll have the closed section kind of first, and you go, that's fine. But if you have people who are interested in coming to council, which I think is an important thing, there has to be some consistency. So I would suggest that if we had a closed meeting of council, to show respect to the general public, because probably most of the experts we have are being paid, but is to sit there and say, okay, if we're gonna have a closed section, have it from 7 to 7:30. If we can't conduct the business of council at that time, then but 7:30 there should be a firm start time so that people know this is when we start the open session. And if we can't conduct the business closed in that session, that perhaps we say, well, now there will be. It's unfortunate, but it does two things. It gets us moving, cutting to the chase and getting the business of council done quicker. And it respects the time of the experts, and it respects the time of the people who want to be in council to view it. So those are my thoughts. And so, again, I don't know whether we need to kick this back to staff after everyone's had their input, but I do have concerns the way it's written right now, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, before I go to Mayor and Deputy Mayor, Dina wants to say something.
To answer some of your questions, Councilor Foster, through the chair, it is written into the bylaw with regards to who makes the decision for comment period, and that would be the mayor. It is not the clerk, and the clerks would be there simply to assist anybody to locate the item they're looking for. I do agree with you about the general nature of the comment. Staff are just there to assist the public to find the item that they're looking to discuss, not to vet any of their comments. Absolutely not. It's not what that is meant for. It is simply all of the changes that are proposed are just efficiency changes, so that the public gets a better experience. We've had a lot of comments, both on many different fronts, and I have taken a lot of time to look at what other municipalities do with regards to question and comment period. In the county of Simcoe alone, there are 11 municipalities that have one period. 6 municipalities, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. 10 municipalities that have one period, one that has 2, in addition to us, and there are 6 that don't have any comment or question period. So that's just some of the research I've been doing. We can certainly tweak this. It's just a starting point for council to start the conversation on to how to make some changes. I did want to address one of your other comments, and I can't remember exactly what your other issue was at this point.
Was it the start
Consistent
time?
start time.
Start time, yes. So it is written to the bylaw that the general start time for regular meetings is 7 p.m. and that would still remain. The idea is that if there was a closed session, perhaps we could move that to 6 p.m. But if it were to end early, I would expect that council would still, so the public is knowing that the general start of the meeting is 7 p.m., that would remain. Staff would be there to assist members of the public at 6:30 as normal, with signing up for a question and comment period. One of the clerks would be available to assist the public. But that way, at 7 p.m., any report out of closed session would be at the regular time of the meeting and not at a different time, so the public can count on 7 p.m. is the regular start of our meetings. If we were to do a closed session, and I think it respects the time of the public, staff, council, any consultants, and is very respectful of the finances of what some of those meetings do cost the town. So that's the idea. It's certainly we could clarify that in the bylaw so that it's a little more clear. But the general start of the meeting is meant to be 7 p.m. Not another time, and we wouldn't. And only for closed sessions would we start early. But I think that we would always convene at 7 p.m. to start the regular process of our meetings.
Thank you, I appreciate that comment, and again, I have no challenge with, personally, no challenge with council coming in early to deal with that, but there has to be consistency from the public point of view. Thank you.
Mayor Fulton.
Sorry, Dina, did yours?
Oh, sorry, just one other comment.
Sorry.
I don't have any issue with, Councillor Boulanger had the staff. I don't have any issue with removing that. That was simply an efficiency measure to allow any items to be dealt with more quickly. But I don't have any issue removing that item for referring deputations to staff. I don't have an issue removing that. Of course not. But it simply was from an efficiency perspective. Sometimes someone might fill out a delegation form, not realizing that they can just get their issue dealt with, but once the form is filled out, we are obligated to put it on the agenda, and this would allow us flexibility to say, did you know that you don't have to go through the deputation process? We can serve you more quickly by going directly through staff, but it's not meant to, if anybody does still want to go through deputations, absolutely those deputations would be brought before council.
Okay, Mayor Fulton.
Thank you. I'm going to start by saying, as head of council, I have been answering all questions asked of me. I've read on social media last night, this is about silencing the public. This is about she and her, that she doesn't want to answer questions of the public. That is completely untrue. This is about bringing respect and decorum back to our council chambers. I have sat with many of you around this table, and if you think back to the time before 2014, there was respect in that council chambers. And while there was a question period, it was a two-way street of respect, and that went out the window last term of council. Our council chambers turned into a circus, people clapping, people interrupting. I think this is a good start. I think Dina's heard some feedback that could, I'd support it going back for some more tweaks. If the question period is left in, I have absolutely no issue with that, but I'd be looking for some protocols and for some support from this council that if the public is not going to respect our rules of our council chambers, and if we take the general comment or nature of the comment out, I have no issue with that. Name, address, and the item that you're speaking to. But we have been finding, and you can look back at the recordings, the rules aren't being followed. We're using something and we're trying to stir a pot over here. And, some of us had 4 years of a circus already, and I can tell you it was embarrassing. I would go out in the community, I would hear from people, colleagues across the province saying, what is going on in Wasaga Beach? And it was embarrassing. And I just think it's time to get back to respectful behavior in our council chambers, and I think this is an excellent start. And while we can do some tweaking, again, I have no issue with question period staying, but we need to have protocols in place, and if they are not followed by the public needs to understand that there will be ramification for that. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. As a member of the last council that actually brought forward the comment period at the beginning of the meeting, I'm very happy to see it staying there. I think that's the really important part of community involvement. I think we need to be able to have an opportunity to hear from our residents before the final vote goes through at that council meeting. So I'm very happy to see that there. And with question period, whether it stays, whether it goes, I think we just need to remind everyone that it's a privilege. The majority of councils don't provide that to their residents, and when ours continue to abuse it, they really should not be given that privilege. So whether we restrict it, whether we eliminate it, I think we do what we need to do, because again, our chamber is very important. Democracy is very important, and we need to have some respect at the council table.
Yeah. Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did I understand, Ian, that in Simcoe County, besides ourselves, there's only one other municipality that allows 2 periods out of 8, what is there, 16, 18? 17 municipalities, okay. I'm prepared to support this as it's written, actually. On my different terms of council, I started off under Mayor Borthwick. There was no question, there was no periods at all during that time for the public to ask questions or comment on it. It evolved during Mayor Patterson that we allowed the one session on there, and I agree, it was always very respectful. There was comments made back and forth, and things were addressed, and I'm happy with the one. That seems to be the norm in the county, to go with it. So I would support it as it's written, but if there's going to be some tweaks, that's fine too.
Okay. Councillor Boulanger?
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of things, and no different than what happens now around the table. When you attend a meeting, sometimes questions arise based on the discussion that's occurring. So the one thing that wasn't addressed and was brought up at the last meeting is that comment period should maybe proceed any deputations or presentations, so that the public get to comment on the entire agenda, not something that's already passed. And I'm an advocate to keep the question period, because when residents come to a meeting, sometimes they form the question based on what's being discussed at the meeting, and it's important, and we should encourage the public to attend. And I totally agree with the mayor that the behavior of some people, but we do not and should not diminish democracy because of the behavior of a few people. Address the few people. But the reality is that, and this didn't come up as a suggestion over the last 4 years, when I agree there were many meetings where it was a circus. And I certainly don't advocate that that's what our meetings should become. It should be an effective way for the community to, in a professional manner, make council aware of concerns, suggestions, recommendations, whatever it is. But just if we do retain the question period, which I am a strong advocate for, because people formulate questions through the meeting, is you cannot expect them to have that question 15 minutes before the meeting starts. They may not formulate the question they want to ask at the end of the session until halfway through the meeting.
Okay. I might just, I may be wrong, Councillor Boulanger, but I didn't get the sense that the recommendation was that the questions be if it was to continue, only the comments. So
No, I was just saying if we do.
I don't think it was,
Right.
I don't think that pre-stating the nature of the comment, of your presentation was in respect to the question. It was only in respect to the comment
Right. Okay.
section. That's my understanding of the way I read it. Is that, because in that document, the question period was actually recommending that it not be there at all. So yeah, so it's only with respect to the comment period.
Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Kinney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm in support of keeping the question period, but as our worship had mentioned, there's got to be some proper etiquette developed so that there is that mutual respect, because I feel everybody around this table respects our community, and we can still disagree with an issue and still be professional about it. So I think we should send it back to staff to try and formulate some etiquette, proper code of conduct for that area, if that's the will of the council.
Can I do them first, or do you want to go ahead?
It's in specific.
Okay, Tina?
Just to let council know, I know we're talking about rules of decorum, but rules of decorum are written into the procedure bylaw currently. They are all in there, and any councillor is able to call a point of order if anything's getting out of control. The mayor has the ability to put some things together or act on some of the things that are in the procedural bylaw currently. If I may make a suggestion as food for thought or to spark discussion, is perhaps that we could, instead of just having this comment period, that we combine it as a comment and question period, and at the beginning of the meeting, so that members of the public can comment or question on staff reports and committee reports, coordinated committee reports as well, so that we're not limiting it to comments. Perhaps we open it up for questions and comments at the beginning of the meeting during that one period, to be similar to other municipalities.
Okay. With respect, Dean, I think Councillor Belange's position was that some people don't form the question until they've heard the discussion, which would not be possible if we were to combine them together at the beginning.
Typically, the discussion happens during our coordinated committee. It doesn't really happen at the council table, and the agenda shows all the decisions that are up for adoption at the meeting. There's not typically that discussion at council meetings, and you usually have delegations come to our committees rather than our council meeting is really the formalization of the decision.
Excuse me. Yeah, point well taken. Mayor Belange.
Thank you. I think the one piece that I was trying to allude to earlier is, and the piece that is missing from this is how to deal with the public who refuse to follow our council chambers protocols. You know, those who want to get up to the mic and scream and yell and talk over the chair, or who want to call out specific members of council, even though they have been told that that's not appropriate. For those individuals who want to continue that type of behavior, there needs to be a protocol in place that this council is comfortable as to how we're going to deal with them. And I think that needs to be a piece of this so that it is a clear understanding. Council members are being respectful. We expect the same back. And if that can't happen, then there will be ramifications.
Okay. Just gonna did you want to say something?
I'll let you go,
Mr. Chairman. A couple of comments just from my own point of view. First one with respect to the closed session beginning early. This is actually a format that I'm familiar with. I can't say that it's still in place because I haven't checked lately, but a number of years ago, too many years ago, because I'm now admitting how long I've been retired, but this was a format that was instituted by the Simcoe County District School Board. And in response to Councillor Foster's concern, the school board would go into open session at 6 p.m. rather, and the first motion would be to, if necessary, to move to closed session. That was, we opened the meeting and immediately there's a motion to go to closed session. Would enter closed session, and the business of closed session would be discussed, but the business of closed session ended at, I can't remember, but it was always 5 or 10 minutes ahead of 7 p.m. If it had been completed, then in fact it was done, and the motions about closed session went forward to the public meeting at the end of the meeting. If it hadn't been finished, it was simply, closed session was simply put in recess. The public meeting started at 7 o'clock, went through its agenda, and at the end of the public meeting, the motion was to return to private session, and the rest of the business was completed. So I can simply say from personal experience, it worked very efficiently, but as I said, to Councillor Foster's concern, the timing of the public part of the meeting was always set. There was no overlap, there was no, well, let's just finish this off for 2 more minutes or whatever. It was cut off at a certain point and the meeting went forward. So I'm comfortable with that format. I think it gets a lot of business out of the way and allows you the public meeting, and you don't necessarily drag on late into the evening for staff as well as for councillors. My second comment is with respect to the question and comment periods. I'm okay with the recommendation, but I think that there is a place for question period, and all the issues of respect and so forth have been addressed, and I won't get into them. But I think there's a place to reiterate each time if it is determined that this is continued. I think there's a place to reiterate every time. A little more than the wording that's currently there that says we now have a 15-minute period when people can do this, this, and this. And there's a section that goes on to that that says something to the effect, David, I would have to wordsmith it. There's a section that goes on to that that says individuals must clearly identify the specific item, or the specific agenda item to which the comment or the question is being applied, and without, again, I'm just making up language, without preamble, without further comment, specifically state the comment, I'm in favor of for this reason, or I'm opposed for this reason to this item. Under the question period, it is simply, I'm referring specifically to item such and such, you know, what is, where is, why is such and such. So it's a clearly stated question. I remember Mayor Patterson, after this was first initiated on several occasions, sort of when somebody started into a novel in advance of the question or the comment, simply stating, stop, what is the question? Specifically, what is the question? And I think, you know, that's a middle ground that people, you know, council may wish to consider. I'm okay with it the way it is, but maybe we simply need to try a middle ground, and if it fails to meet the objectives, then we can move one step further as we go forward. But I'm thinking that I saw some nods around the table when I heard somebody mention about referring back to staff for some further consideration. I saw a number of nods. Is that the will of David?
Just read the motion before you say that.
Yeah, okay.
It's
Okay.
like if the motion says that.
Yep, okay. All right. So we're going to read the motion? Oh, sorry, George. Yeah, you wanted to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to repeat a couple of things that the clerk mentioned in terms of her report, and she's taken a look at the procedural bylaw and looked at best practice in terms of what other municipalities are doing with respect to the various items that she's put forward as recommendations. So these are reflective of what other municipalities are doing, and she's also given some specific examples with respect to the comment question period. And I think those are relevant in terms of council's decision making. I heard around the table the suggestion that perhaps comment / question period be combined, and certainly you know, the clerk in her research has identified that some municipalities have done that at the beginning of the meeting. So that's something that certainly could be considered. The concern from a staff perspective is the practical reality of what the mayor alluded to, is when somebody comes up to the microphone and takes the mic and starts to ask a question that's completely irrelevant to what the council's agenda. The practical reality is, how do you stop that individual from continuing their comments? And we've seen examples over the last few meetings of individuals talking over her worship, continuing with their comments, not backing away from the podium when they've been asked respectfully to back away. And I don't have an answer for that, Mr. Chair, in terms of the best way to deal with that, but it comes down to what the mayor alluded to, is the respect, where you're granted a privilege to come and speak to council, express your concerns, ask your questions. But if you don't understand the process or the procedure, or this is your first time, if you're asked to step away, then I think the individual should step away. And we just haven't seen that. So, again, I don't have an answer, Mr. Chair, but it certainly has made it difficult for that portion of the meeting. Certainly from staff's perspective in terms of how to move the meeting along. We're not in a position at this point to get up and deal with that. We don't have the technology in the council chamber to turn the microphone off. We've tried that, but that interrupts our Rogers broadcast in terms of no sound for the Rogers broadcast. So we're if somebody wants to take the mic and just not leave the podium, there's a practical consideration that is yet to be resolved. So I just wanted to provide those comments.
I think one consideration could be that if that occurs, then the individual is just no longer given the privilege of participating, and should they continue that behavior in some other context, then they are just not given the privilege of being in attendance of the room. I think we have a right, if necessary, to say to someone, sorry, your previous behavior is not being accepted. So, Joe?
Thank you, Chair. The only thing that, and to your comments, is I think we also have to be take into consideration that most people, the most difficult thing for them to ever do is to get up and talk in front of an audience. And so not everyone is well spoken, not everyone articulates well, they get nervous. So all I'm saying is there has to, and that's not to excuse people that are just, being disrespectful. But what I'm saying is that if someone does a little bit of pre-ramble, sometimes it's nerves. With all the best intentions, they had formulated what they wanted to say, but they get nervous. And so just understand, it's very easy to shut residents down depending on how we react to what they're saying, and we should be doing the opposite. We want the input from our residents, but we want it to be respectful.
I think we're going to move to the motion, David, unless this is something totally new and different from what's been said before.
It is and it isn't. It's got directly to do with the amendment or the proposal in front of us. And the reason I want a little clarification is it says that the General Government Committee recommends Council adopt the amendments to the procedural bylaw at the July 30th meeting, incorporating any further changes as directed. Now my challenge is the only meeting we have between now and we have council. So I don't want to delay it, but I want to figure out a way that we can, because Dina's heard feedback from a variety of people. It is referring it back to staff. I just want to make sure that not only we get it, but the general public have access to the revised one prior to the July 30th, right? Like we are referring it back to staff, but it's going to come for approval. It's not. So I just wondered procedurally how that works.
My sense would be that if we refer it back to staff as a separate motion, then the issue of it coming before the council meeting becomes moot, because it would then have to come back to this committee for further discussion on a new format.
That's what I wanted to make sure.
That would be my interpretation of the issue. I think Councilor Boulanger, with in my review with respect to your comment, I think it is the onus is on the speaker to whether they need to do it in writing on a piece of paper that they have in their lap, or whether they are comfortable to do it, is that the obligation is on the individual to formulate a direct and specific question. That preamble is not allowed, and that the mayor will cut off the preamble and simply say, what is your comment? Or what is your question? And questions are very specific. It doesn't take too many words to ask a question. With respect to the bylaw you just passed, when will it first be enforced? Simple, straightforward question. Not a discussion of the nature of the bylaw, not a discussion of whether you think the bylaw is appropriate. That's a different story. What's the question? And I think if we come to that understanding, and the mayor is able to simply take that position. It's item 6.4, and my comment is, I'm opposed for this reason. I'm in favor for this reason. then it can be very, very beneficial. It's just my own feeling. I'm going to read the motion, and then I think there was a sense of people wanting to refer it back as I got around the table. Oh, Dina?
If I may, Chair Wells, if I can get specific direction at this meeting, the changes would be brought forward with a explanatory note, and council would be able to discuss those changes at the next meeting.
Okay.
It's possible to do that as well.
At the next,
At the council meeting.
okay.
Yeah.
George?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's one option that could go to council, but another option would be that it would go back to staff and then it would come to the August coordinated committee meeting, once you've had an opportunity to consider all the comments today and then bring it back at that meeting.
Correct.
That would be my sense of what I was seeing around the table. I'm seeing nods that,
Yes. I'm just not seeing specific direction as to what you would like me to change. Referring it back to staff would just be referring it to staff, but I do need some sort of direction as to how the majority would like me to make, what changes you would like me to make. I'm certainly open to whatever changes
I
you'd like,
think
but I'm not
my
sure
sense
what
of the discussion around the table, and I will look for any nods, was that I didn't hear a whole lot of issue against the concepts of the closed session, you know, going ahead of time as long as it's clear. That's one of the things I think I saw. The others I think I saw was that there's a consensus, I won't say majority, but certainly a consensus of opinion that would like to maintain the question period in the short term at least, but with some very clear directions and expectations going out there. So that was, I'm not saying that's the majority position. I know you're not in favor of that, Deputy Mayor, I clearly know that. But from the other people around the table, I did get that sense. If I'm totally wrong, George, you're opposed to that as well, so. Okay, Deputy Mayor.
So can I comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're maybe oversimplifying it. I thought that there was more support for combining one public input and maybe making the one at the beginning comment and question. I don't think there was a lot of support to keep two.
Okay. Is that what I'm seeing from everyone?
I'd support that.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate that people formulate questions through the meeting, but if the suggestion is you're going from 30 minutes to 15 minutes, I still would not support that personally. Like if you're gonna combine them and make it 25 minutes or 30 minutes, that's another story. But you know, on many of the subjects and many of the things that we come forward, you know, 15 minutes is very challenging. Some meetings we use 5 minutes or no questions at all.
I know I wouldn't personally support that, the 15-minute period. Yeah, Mayor?
I was just gonna say, I think if we get operating a little bit more efficiently, we won't need 30 minutes to do that. I think most municipalities, I think it's 10 to 15 minutes in these situations. They certainly wouldn't be 30 minutes.
Okay. Well, our clerk, I think we're having a motion to refer, but I think our clerk has legitimately asked for some direction. I'm not sure that we are totally in agreement in terms of what direction we're providing to the clerk. So, David?
Based on that, I'd suggest we go with George's, where we provide input to the clerk and we deal with this at the next coordinated committee meeting. We've got one council meeting in July, that's it.
Mhm.
Like, so I think we need to do that.
One in August.
Again.
Is there one in August? Okay.
Yeah, but I just look and go things like the general nature. I just wanna know what you're speaking about. You can put in, you know, in favor or opposed, or need more info, becomes a question. But to have someone write out, it's not necessary, so, but I think we should do that, George.
It's not a public speaking event.
Correct.
Mark?
Mr. Chair, I would perfectly entertain the concepts of combining them. My issue was that we didn't have, if we took out the question period, the ability for people to ask questions. So I could go with combining.
Okay. now I'm getting a sense of, consensus is 1 period, could be question and or comment. And some very, specific, statements made by her worship prior to it to clearly state the parameters in which they're being allowed. Okay, Mayor?
And the steps that will be taken by council if an individual
Yeah.
comes to the mic and decides to be disrespectful, and it gives us a bit of teeth to get control of our council chambers once again and respect and decorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the input that members of council have provided today is going to be invaluable to the clerk in terms of her going back and having a look at the 2 or 3 items that have been highlighted today, and we'll come back with a report in August. Thank you.
So I'm gonna read the question, and it's moved by,
Not yet.
We have a motion.
that's the motion to refer. Don't I have to have this motion on the table before you can refer it? I don't have to have this motion on the table
Didn't.
first, and then you refer it back?
You didn't read it. It doesn't have to be. Right.
Okay. So this one's gone. Okay. So I have a motion by Councillor Kinney and seconded by Councillor Belanger. Resolve the General Government Committee refer item 6.5.5 back to staff for further review and amendments as directed, to be brought back to the August 15, 2019 coordinated committee meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger?
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor?
Councillor Kinney?
In favor?
Councillor Watson?
In favor?
Chair Wells?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
We're now moving to item 6.5.6, the CAO's report, read the after-hours medical clinic update, and that has also been pulled by Councillor Belanger.
Yes, okay, I just have one comment, thank you, Chair. In reading the report, and I believe the pilot has certainly identified that there is a significant need in our community and that the clinic is being well supported. But from personal experience and following up quite often, there were many evenings where within 5 minutes of opening, they were at full capacity. So we really do not have a good idea of the top end of the need. Like there were, had we had more availability, but people were turned away literally 5 minutes after opening. People coming up were told, we can't take anyone more tonight. And that happened, I would say, on a really consistent basis. I can't say 90% of the time, but it would have probably been in the range of 70-75% of the time.
George?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly I can go back to the clinic coordinator and get that information for the committee. I received an email the following day if the clinic has to close early based on the circumstances that Councillor Belanger has alluded to. I have not been getting emails from our clinic coordinator. That doesn't mean it's not happening, but I could follow up certainly and get that information. The information I have is that yes, there have been occasions. I got an email 2 weeks ago at the beginning of July. There was a Wednesday where it had to close early, but that was 2 weeks ago. So I haven't received any since, but I'll ask for that stat and circulate that to members of council.
Thank you, George. Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the discussion section, I've noted that one of the stats was 53% of patients do not have a family doctor, and it's very heartening to see that we're getting a report coming forward in August to give consideration to reinstituting the doctor recruitment program, as it was cancelled by the previous council. That's a very damaging decision by the previous council. We're seeing the evidence of this. There was no focus on recruiting doctors at that time. Councillor Wells and I, you know, we attended many doctor recruitment sessions over the previous terms of council where we went to medical conferences, we sat there, we talked to doctors, and it was very successful bringing them into the community. And I'm really hopeful that that happens again because it's, that decision has really damaged the community as far as doctors go.
Councillor King?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2 items quickly. I believe at one of the previous meetings where our good people from our walk-in clinic was making a presentation, I posed a question with regards to increasing the duration, and I think that's in the master plan. Once they've basically built out their time, their days per week, then the next step would be to look at expanding the duration in each time. So I think that's in it. And secondly, I like the idea of the doctor recruitment because, as Councillor Watson mentioned, to see over half of the people attending not having physicians, that's not a good situation. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. That was a long time ago. And I wanted to comment on the doctor recruitment program. I think it's good to see that that's coming back. Yes, we have demonstrated there is a need for a walk-in clinic. I'm not sure that it should be run by the town, so I like to see that we're looking at other potential solutions because the core problem might be the lack of people having a family doctor, not just the the availability of the hours. So I'm happy to see that we're looking at it from both angles. Thank you.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I have I'm in the after-hours clinic building regularly, 3 or 4 times a month with the community health center. And the statistics, as perhaps Councillor Boulanger has alluded to, and even myself last week, feeling a little under the weather, thought this is a resource I will attend. Got out of my car, and they have the tent sign at the front door. The clinic is closed. So if no one goes up, if they're doing a count, and you see it there, and you just turn around in the parking lot, you miss that number. Like that number is missed completely. I had hoped this would have come to council earlier, but I appreciate it being here now. And it is a cost for the town. We're the only municipality in Ontario who's trying to help fund one of these. And it technically it shouldn't be that way, but I think the asset, the value to it is something that's worth pursuing after all the research is done. But again, if you look at the after-hours clinic in Collingwood, for example, the family health team is responsible for that. People believe they're funded by the LHINs and they're funded by hospitals. They're not. The doctors run them themselves. And so anyway, I look forward to seeing this taken from a trial period on. And again, if we get on it now, we'll have everything in place by the end of October, and November 19th, I believe, is the anniversary of the whole thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just personal comment. I think this was a passion, I guess, is one that was heard by previous Councillor Ego, and he said it would be a success, and it is. There's no question about that. I think, though, the whole issue of doctor recruitment is a critical one. I'm not sure where we fit in the budget, but I know that in previous years when we were doing recruitment, there was a $60,000 incentive to help a doctor coming to town. They were then committed for 5 years, I think. They were committed for 5 years to the town based on that $60,000 setup support for their computers and staffing and whatever over a 5-year period, and it seemed to work. And I know there are municipalities that are still doing that. So yes, I would be very much supportive of re-looking carefully at that whole recruitment, and the sooner the better, because the various Ontario Medical Association conferences and whatever are 2 or 3 times a year, and I know we just put up a banner and talk to doctors about why it would be wonderful for them to come to Wasaga Beach, that we would benefit, but they would benefit more from getting to live in the greatest community there is. So I would like to see us continue that kind of frontline engagement with the doctors through members of council. I think we also have an obligation, based on the success of the program, to start to, for want of a better phrase, rattle the chain of the Ministry of Health, to get them to start to recognize that they need to be a direct involvement here. And George, I don't know whether that could start in August at the AMO, whether or not we can delegate the Ministry of Health and take a report of all the statistics to them and say, why aren't you supporting this? And put them on the spot and keep them on the spot, keep the heat to them going forward. So just, you know, it's a great success, and my congratulations to the people that had the foresight to bring it forward and to make it happen. So with that, I see no other comment. I'll read the motion. It is moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Belanger, that the Committee of the Whole receive this report for information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Foster.
In favor.
Councillor Kinney.
In favor?
Councillor Watson.
In favor?
Chair Wells.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next report is the administration. It's been pulled by 2 individuals. I'm thinking that we're probably going to take more than 2 minutes to discuss that. So I'm looking to council for nods of approval that we simply break for 2 minutes. Anybody that needs to take a break, make it fast. Run down the hall, don't walk. And don't slip and fall either, because we don't want a lawsuit. And then at 11 o'clock, we will go into the public meeting that is was scheduled. So we're in recess for now 1.5 minutes.
We will reconvene with a public meeting. The proposed amendment to the Town of Wasaga Beach Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2003-60, which is parking standards for public uses. Notice of the public meeting was published in the Wasaga Sun newspaper on June 27th and circulated to all agencies, service providers, and school boards as prescribed in the Planning Act. This provided 20 days of notice for the public meeting, and the meeting is therefore properly constituted as required by the Planning Act. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would amend the minimum parking requirement for public surface facilities, examples arena, a library, with the effect of reducing and standardizing the minimum parking requirements from either 1 space per 18 or 20 square meters of gross floor area, or 1 space per 4 person maximum assigned capacity, or per 4 seats of permanent fixed seating. 2, 1 space per 30 square meters of gross floor square area, and or 1 space per 5 person maximum design capacity, whichever is the lesser. As a result of the circulation of the notice of public meeting, the following written comments were received. Letters of support, none. Letters of no objection, none. Letters of concern, none. Letters of objection, none. Mr. Weep, have we received any further letters of correspondence in regard to this application?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Weep will now make a brief presentation and will provide further details with respect to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment.
Oh, we need the mouse over here. Found it. That's not it. It wasn't the screen, right? So, yeah. What does that one say? Yeah, it was it's the only one we have. It's the only one. It's okay, I've got another plan. Maybe. Just give me a sign when you want the next slide. Oh, you got it. Will that work? I need to do this.
Okay, not sure if that
First
will work.
presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to you and to members of council and members of the public. So this public meeting was scheduled pursuant to direction from council received in June for town staff to proceed with proposed modifications to the town's zoning bylaw to both standardize and modernize the regulations for parking standards for public uses. Next one, please. As required under the Planning Act, a notice of public meeting, as well as in the course of the presentation material through a public meeting, we're required to outline both the purpose and effect of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. Similar to the public uses zoning bylaw amendment that has previously gone forward to public meeting, this is considered to be a minor housekeeping amendment, and specifically again to modernize parking standards for public service facilities, for instance a library and arena, but it would include other forms of public service facilities as defined in the zoning bylaw. So the first component of the purpose would be to be more reflective of more recent standards that have been implemented by other jurisdictions. The town's zoning bylaw in its current form was originally approved by council in 2003. Therefore, it's about 16 years old, and standards that have not been changed since then are also about 16 years old. And secondly, to improve the flexibility and responsiveness in the development of public uses. For instance, by updating standards to be more reflective of standards in other jurisdictions with more recent zoning bylaws, it could conceivably avoid the need to consider site-specific deviations in the zoning bylaw, for instance, by way of a minor variance. Eliminating that procedural step could allow for the approvals process in delivering public uses to be to occur more expeditiously. Next one, please. As Madam Chair has indicated, the effect of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would be to reduce and standardize the minimum parking requirements for public service facilities. The reduction is self-evident in the proposed updates to the metrics. The standardization reference is intended to reflect the fact that currently the zoning bylaw considers different parking standards for different forms of public uses. And so therefore by consolidating those different uses by way of a single standard, a single metric, it simplifies the parking calculation and also the zoning bylaw for public use and implementation. So specifically, the change would be to essentially go from either one parking space per 18 or 20 square meters, depending on the type of public service facility, whether it's an arena or a library or other form. From one space per either 18 or 20 square meters of gross floor area, or from one space per 4 persons of maximum design capacity or 4 seats of permanent fixed seating, to a single combined metric of the lesser of 1 space per 30 square meters of gross floor area, or 1 space per 5 persons of maximum design capacity. And before moving forward, if I could just include, so under the Building Code Act, for instance, we discussed this with the town's chief building official and other building staff, and uses like an arena or a library have the same form of occupancy under the building code, which is an assembly occupancy. So when we make reference to 1 space per 5 persons of maximum design capacity, that would be pursuant to building code requirements under an assembly form of occupancy, and that would typically be calculated by an architect. So that's a form of it's a data point that we would obtain through any proposal, and the proposed update would allow for the lesser of the two to be implemented, again, as the minimum parking standard. There's always an opportunity to exceed that as operational needs would dictate. Next slide, please. Specifically, the changes that would be required to implement the effect of that proposed zoning amendment would be in section 3.38.9 of the zoning bylaw. Specifically, it would include consolidating the references to public buildings, community centers, and libraries into a single consolidated term of public service facilities, and then to implement the proposed parking ratio as updated to that single defined term in that table. Additionally, section 26 is the section by which the downtown zoning bylaw amendment was presented to council. And the downtown zoning bylaw amendment includes its own parking standards table, and therefore to implement that single change across the board to all lands within the town, changes would be required to both section 338.9 as well as 26.215AI table 2 of the zoning bylaw to implement those same changes to such uses as an arena and a library within the downtown area. Next slide, please. So this would constitute the public meeting required under the Planning Act for the town to consider the minor housekeeping amendment presented. Following the receipt and taking of notes of comments made during this public meeting, town staff would intend to report back to coordinated committee at the earliest possible date once we've received all necessary comments and would be prepared to present a recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of council, and members of the public.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone present that would like to provide input, either in support of or in opposition to the proposed amendment? If so, please stand and clearly state your name and address in order that may be correctly entered into the records of today's proceedings. Do I have to ask 3 times? There's no. Okay. I will ask members of committee if they have any questions or comments with regards to the proposed amendment. Councillor Keeney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To our presenters, I'd like to move forward with the public aspect, but I'm just wondering whether or not this would have a movement towards how we look at private development and their parking requirements. Is something in the works to align it, or is it a whole different animal?
Thank you, Councillor, through you, Madam Chair. The focus of the scoped amendment originated with the town's objective to deliver on a new library and a new arena, and to ensure that parking standards are up to date, and that a site-specific variance could potentially be avoided through standardized and modernized parking standards. It's my understanding that either in lockstep or potentially with some overlap, the town's zoning bylaw would also be subject to review, to a comprehensive review. Again, either with some overlap with the official plan review or sometime immediately thereafter, and that through that process, parking standards as a whole would also be eligible for review.
Thank you.
Councillor Belanger?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I guess I have a few questions, but, you know, I'm also, you know, with autonomous vehicles coming and everything else, I think there is certainly an opportunity to look at modernization and standardization, but then you look at the recplex, and I'm assuming with the recplex, we had met the original bylaw, yet we had to put on a significant addition to parking, and that is one busy parking lot. I guess we need to make sure that we don't make any mistakes, because parking is so critical, is once you make a major infrastructure like the library and arena. But I also share the concern that Councillor Kenny said, is that you know, and I know it's a little more difficult when we get into commercial and retail, because when you get into, there's a difference between smaller commercial and retail outlets as opposed to some of the larger ones. But when we say it's a minor amendment, when we actually look at the amount of real estate that's involved on this change, it can be significant, and it can be a huge advantage to a Canadian Tire or a Superstore or a Walmart that potentially could sell off or annex land to another business. So there's a lot of dollars at stake, and in fairness, for the municipality to say, okay, we'll look after ourselves and not look after commercial retail. So I would be comfortable if council was saying that we're going to set a date for a review and have retail commercial done as quickly as possible. But just to say that we're going to address our own municipal needs because we're building a new library and double pad arena, but not considering the needs of some of the major employers in our town, I just feel that that's somewhat unfair.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I look at it, there are two questions come to mind. One is the spot per square foot or per 5-person capacity, which I think is great, because potentially it will create less completely huge parking lots. It'll allow more green space to be around the area. The question I have, though, and it kind of links to those two, is a parking space itself has a minimum size. So if you look at Schoonertown Mall, for example, that has the smallest possible parking spot you can have by law. And you know, I forget how many cars you can fit in there, 8,000 or something. But you can hardly open the door.
Yeah.
And so while we're decreasing the number of spots, will there be any thought given to the physical space of a parking spot? And I'm thinking perhaps not so much at the library, but at the arena. And this is not a negative term, it's a common term, is a hockey mob flips in with no disrespect, but they flip in with the SUV or the van and they're pulling out goalie equipment. Is there going to be any space width changes? So in other words, don't have it minimum because they won't be able to open a door to any vehicle. Will there be any consideration of that for something specifically like an arena that has people getting out with bulky equipment? No offense to the hockey clubs.
Through you, Madam Chair, the bylaw that's currently being processed and at this public meeting does not consider dimensional spaces for each parking stall. That is a factor that's currently in the active zoning bylaw. It requires a space of approximately 10 feet by 20 feet, 10 feet wide by 20 feet long. In practice, bylaws are typically a minimum requirement when it comes to things like that. In practice, if we were to look at some other sites, for instance, if we were to look at Costco puts in their stalls larger than the zoning minimum. So it's a business decision. So similarly, the town, when it comes to the design, site design of the library or arena or any other public service facility space that we might be working on, could at that time make a conscious decision to install slightly larger sizes based on the function, because certainly nobody likes to get their door dinged by a hockey stick, and it does happen.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for that explanation, because I've seen a lot now whether it's a business decision or the municipality does it, but you'll see large vehicles, small vehicles, charging vehicles, expected mother spots. You're seeing all sorts of delineations and parking areas, so that probably is a good way to go because of the variety of vehicles. But I'm happy to hear that we're going forward with the private or commercial aspects of parking also. I've always thought we've been a little overzealous with our parking requirements. I look at Superstore and Canadian Tire, I've never seen those lots full. And the more green space, the better water percolates into the soil and doesn't run off, so it is a consideration, so thank you.
Councillor Blanche.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just further to Councillor Foster's comment, because we are now down to looking at site selection, so if you decide to make the parking space a little larger, according to the bylaw, you would still require the same number. Am I right? So if it was 5, so if we were going to have that as a consideration, it should be something that's dealt with quickly to ensure that the final site selection will incorporate what we want to do.
Through you, Madam Chair, at this stage, staff are not recommending the bylaw be amended to address stall size. There has been the way it's installed in the current bylaw is there is flexibility, and that was purposely done back in 2003, where other municipalities say this is your stall size, you don't have a choice. In Wasaga Beach, we allow the stall size to accordion, provided it meets a minimum area dimension. So we have provided flexibility, and that's to accommodate certain sites where it might be difficult to get a stall, but you might be able to get one in for a smaller vehicle, maybe not a dually. But it is feasible. Typically, the stall size dimension is a business dimension and a function dimension during, which is decided during the design stage of the project. On another topic, with regard to the commercial aspect of zoning requirements for parking, I'll take us back a little bit in history, and I'll make it very brief, but in 2003, the parking requirements were designed in the bylaw as a one-size-fits-all, meaning it was 14 parking stalls for a veterinarian clinic, for a grocery store, for a doctor's office, where it really didn't matter what it was 14 stalls. And the development industry told us that was probably the highest in the province. Since then, we've adjusted it. We now, and we had the Superstore, and we had the Walmart built at that standard. So yes, we acknowledge that there are more than required spaces on those developments. Since then, we've adjusted it once to the 18 spaces or 20 space, depending on the amount of gross floor area, and that was an acknowledgement that the development industry was telling us we're asking for too much parking. The land usage was wasted. Going forward from this point, we're currently working on an official plan update, which will be followed by a comprehensive zoning bylaw update. And it's through that comprehensive zoning bylaw update process that we hope to scope the parking standards and look at it from a much more defined point of view. We'll be looking at it from electric vehicle park-in, do we favor that? We'll be looking at it in terms of going to the private industry and saying, what is a reasonable parking standard for the town of Wasaga Beach? So we do intend to bring that forward as we perform the comprehensive zoning bylaw update.
Councillor Wells?
First, I'd just like to acknowledge that the reference to large vehicles did not go unnoticed. But secondly, as you're going through that review, it's not applicable to this particular bylaw, but as we're going through that review, I would like us to start to consider requirements for permeable pavement as part of our standards going forward. That's my only comment.
Seeing no more. Comments received today will be considered and a decision will be made as to whether committee will recommend the proposed amendment proceed further through the approval process at a future meeting. Anyone receiving notice of the public meeting will receive notice of the decision of council in this matter. If you did not receive the notice and would like to receive a copy of the notice of decision for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, please leave your name and address with the recording secretary or make a written request to the clerk of the town of Wasaga Beach. Thank you. We will move back to general government with Chair Wells.
Okay, we're returning then to the General Government Committee meeting where we left off. The next item on the agenda was item 6.5.7, the Administration's Department, and this is the report re the Marlwood Rogers Lane Subdivision Agreement. It's I've had it pulled by both Mayor Bafolchi and Councillor Boulanger, but CAO, do you wish to speak to it first, or do you wish to add anything further?
If I may, I'll be brief, Mr. Chair. Just with respect, there was a statement in the report dealing with a next step of moving if council wasn't satisfied or felt that it was important to get a definitive answer with respect to the statement of whether the statement in the agreement is a restrictive covenant or not. I've been asked by a couple of members of council, what the next step would be. It's outlined in the report about going to court. That would be to the Superior Court, that there would have to be an application made. There's not a large cost to make the application. However, if there is a dispute with respect to the facts, then it could escalate because you have to provide material to the court or maybe witnesses or whatnot. But in this particular case, it would just be to state that, and there's a couple of lawyers' opinions that say it's not a restrictive covenant, and then the court would make that decision. So I consulted with the town solicitor, and he's indicated that the cost to proceed to start is fairly minimal, but there may be costs depending on whether this is challenged or not. There was a question with respect to how long it would take to get a judge to hear the matter, and the response was it would depend on how much urgency was claimed and how much time would be required by a judge to make that decision. He indicates that at a minimum it would be several months. There is an opportunity to have it heard on a Tuesday. That's the regular motions day in the Barrie Court, the Superior Court. But it would only be done on that particular day if there was a degree of urgency that it had to be heard. So I just wanted to provide that information to members of the committee, because I have been asked that question if that is something that council does decide that it wishes to proceed.
by Mayor Befolchi first.
Okay, thank you. This is something that I feel we need to get right. There was a definite intent when this happened, years ago, and that's one thought process. We also have a legal opinion, and it is an opinion of one individual. I'm not comfortable, making that decision, to be honest with you, to be able to say, based on this one person's opinion, based on all the other feedback I've heard from back in the day. So it does state in here that it could, that the developer could petition the court for a decision. I think that is the best way to go. It would make a decision final, and we would have to move on from that point, depending on what that decision is.
Councilor Boulanger, you
Yes,
also hold
thank
it?
you, Chair. Yeah, I believe the mayor just suggested that there was one, but the CAO just indicated that there were two opinions. So that you just stated that when you,
So, Mr. Chair, yes, so there were two opinions that the town has received, one from its development solicitor, Harold Elston, and then committee asked me to review the matter, and I, in my review, sought the assistance of a second solicitor who was advising me on that. So there's two opinions, one's appended here, and council received the
and
other.
both those legal opinions were the same?
Correct. They indicated that the statement in the subdivision agreement is not a restrictive covenant.
And Attorney Holston, I believe that he was a specialist, I believe.
Actually, Mr. Elston is a municipal solicitor that specializes in planning matters. Mr. Velboom, whose opinion is attached to this, to my report, he is considered a specialist in drafting subdivision agreements and in planning law.
So my final question is then, if we as a council, after receiving two legal opinions, one from a specialist, proceed and want the court to decide, would the developer then have the ability to charge back those court costs or legal fees or any damages that could occur because of delays back to the municipality?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That question was asked as well, and any court costs typically are requested, and then the court makes a determination. The opinion that I received from the solicitor was that it would be subject to the court, and it would be subject to how much time the court took to consider the matter.
So I don't know if you, through the chair, if you answered my question, would, in your opinion, would the developer have the right to request in the event that the court rules in their favor and in unison with two legal opinions, would then all of those charges become the liability of the municipality?
Mr. Chair, I don't think I'm in a position to answer that.
And that would be the judge's decision. Any other comments or questions? At this point, we are not being asked to act on this. We're only receiving the report according to this motion. I'm not sure what that, I have to go to the CAO and the clerk in terms of, by receiving, are we accepting the decision that it is not, or I'm just receiving really just means we now have it, but we've not made any decision on where to go next, unless I'm misunderstanding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think that parallel to this question in terms of the specific question about the restrictive covenant, there is a development application, a zoning bylaw application that are being considered by the planning department. that will come back to this table at some point. And council will be asked to make a decision with respect to the development proposal. You have the advice that's been outlined in this report, and at that time, you would make a decision with respect to whether you feel that the subdivision is appropriate or not appropriate, taking into account all the information that you've been presented. Obviously, in this report that I presented to you today, that the assertion that the language in the subdivision agreement is a restrictive covenant that prevents further development from taking place is not in fact a restrictive covenant. So council is free to make a decision on the merits of the application, whether you want to approve it or not approve it. There's not a barrier as for this particular alleged or presumed restrictive covenant. So that's what's before you today, is just information that goes in part of a broader decision with respect to the proposal.
Thank you. You're saying it's not a barrier, but I guess I do see it as to wait and have something come forward months down the road and us have this discussion. I think it's only fair to both the developer and staff to let them know how council feels about it. You know, to let months go by, it's gonna hit the table. We may not agree with just letting it go at that point. I think it's better to let that be known now than drag it out for everybody, because that's not really a fair way of doing things either. You know, personally, I see this as it's no different than conservation authority or traffic study or something else to proving that the development is appropriate. I personally am not comfortable with what I've heard from both sides to be able to make a proper decision on it. I understand that there's, you know, saying two, but I know that you have one clause in here that has been captured from one of our lawyers, indicating that if you're not comfortable, you have this other route to go, and I feel more comfortable with that.
George?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going on the last sentence by the CAO that it's not a planning matter anymore. It appears to be, and that the court is a legal matter, and so I would feel more comfortable getting a court decision on it also going forward. I was on council in 2003. I know the background of it, so I know from that point of view, but based on the report, sort of removes it from planning and outputs. Suggestion seems to be that final determination will be through the courts.
Any other comments? So I think if the intent would be to take it that route, you would need a motion to that effect, would you not, to make application to the Superior Court of Justice to rule on the issue? Not on the development, but to rule on specifically whether this does constitute a restrictive covenant or not.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I was just gonna further, if I may.
Yes.
I think this is something that the developer needs to clarify. In terms, I think that, you know, as part of their overall development package, that it should be the developer that makes the application to the Superior Court to clarify this particular point. The process that planning is going through to process the application, they're certainly moving forward with that application. There is some time to be able to go to the court. But in terms of whether this is a town responsibility or developer responsibility, in terms of clarifying for council's benefit, as well as all the other matters, I would suggest that it would be the developer's responsibility.
Okay. So the motion as it stands, that we simply receive your report, would stand today, and our planning staff would take a position that they need a court decision before they can process the application to any level of approval. Is that?
Mr. Chair, I would suggest the motion be amended, if it's the desire of the committee, that the report be received and that the developer be requested to seek a court decision with respect to the status of the language that's been referred to as a restrictive covenant.
So I've amended the motion. Seeing no further comment, I've amended the motion to reflect the CAO's comments. Put it on the tape. Joe?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to oppose the motion. I'm very concerned with what's happened, that this is going to incur additional cost to the taxpayer.
Okay.
I believe that we have had expert opinion on this that will be taken obviously into account by the courts.
Okay. Okay. I have a motion. I have to ask Councillors Watson and Foster if they're okay with the amendment once I've read it, and if not, we will seek another mover or seconder if any's available. So I'll read it as it stands. If either the mover or seconder are uncomfortable with it, they can so declare it. So currently it's moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Councillor Foster. That the General Government section of Coordinating Committee recommend to Council that it receive the Chief Administrative Officer's report on the presumed restrictive covenant outlined in the Marlwood Masters Lane Subdivision Agreement, instrument number SC 110488, and further, that the developer seek a court decision in respect of the status of any perceived restrictive covenant. Councillors, are you okay with
Just thinking
that?
about it.
David?
Just want to think about it. Could you reread that amendment, please?
And further, that the developer seek a court decision in respect of the status of any perceived restrictive covenant.
Yeah, right. I'll stand.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So the motion is on the floor. Seeing no other comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger,
Opposed?
Mayor Byfolchi,
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray,
In favor?
Councillor Foster,
In favor.
Councillor Kinney,
Opposed?
Councillor Watson,
In favor?
Chair Wells.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 5 in favor and 2 opposed.
The rest of the items were part of our consent agenda. So we are now looking to close session. So I'll read the motion moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Councillor Boulanger. Resolved that pursuant to section 239 sub 2 sub C and sub E of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, the next portion of the Coordinated Committee meeting of July 18, 2019 be closed to the public to discuss a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or the local board. So we are in closed session. Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry about that.
Mr. Chair,
That's
would
okay.
we be able to leave and then come back quickly?
I
Wait
would
for you to
certainly
back up.
entertain we'll get the motion dealt with,
Okay, sorry.
and then I'll entertain a quick break before we get started, so. Mr. CAO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger,
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi,
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray,
In favor?
Councillor Foster,
In favor.
Councillor Kinney,
In favor?
Councillor Watson,
In favor.
Chair Wells.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
We will take a 7.5-minute break, and we to open session. All set to go? Okay. Two motions coming out of closed session. First is moved by Councillor Kinney and seconded by Councillor Belanger. Resolved, the coordinating committee confirmed the direction provided to the senior planner in closed session pertaining to a local planning appeal tribunal matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray.
In favor.
Councillor Foster.
In favor.
Councillor Kinney.
In favor?
Councillor Watson.
In favor.
Chair Wells.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
And a second motion out of closed session, resolved that moved by Deputy Mayor Bray, seconded by Mayor Bafolchi. Resolved that the coordinating committee confirm the direction provided to the CAO in closed session pertaining to a potential arena and library property.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Foster. In favor. Councillor Kinney.
In favor?
Councillor Watson.
In favor.
Councillor Wells.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.